I am Jim Collison, and live from our virtual studios around the world, or at least today here in the state of Nebraska, this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on February 26th, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. And today we have a very special organization with us. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's actually a link right above me there on the live page that'll take you to YouTube. Sign in with your Google account, and you can post your questions in the chat. And we'd love to even have you check in where you're listening from. If you're listening to the recorded version, and many of you do, and you have questions, you can still send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We make these available that way as well. Or on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button while you're at it. Denise McLean is our host today. She works as a senior practice expert with Gallup. And Denise, that sounds super important. Thanks for being on Call to Coach, and welcome.
Thanks, Jim. It's a beautiful day in Nebraska. Not only am I here sitting in sunny Nebraska, but so is our first ever strengths-based organization winners. We have two folks from Mary Lanning Healthcare system. They're out of Hastings, Nebraska. Before I introduce them, let me just do a few intro about Mary Lanning Healthcare. So Mary Lanning Healthcare is a standalone private, not-for-profit healthcare organization. It's headquartered in Hastings, Nebraska. They have approximately 1,300 employees, which includes 187 physicians and advanced practice professionals. And they offer a broad array of acute care and outpatient services. Like many of our friends in the healthcare world, they've been dealing with COVID dramatically this year. But most importantly, they've also been a Gallup partner for over 14 years. This has resulted in changing their culture, and they began with employee engagement. They actually started with an employee engagement ratio of about a 2-to-1 ratio. Today, they sit at a world-class ratio of 16-to-1. They've been very proud to be named a Gallup Workplace Excellence Award last year for the first time, but prior to that, they were a Gallup Workplace Award winner for 6 consecutive years. I've got two very special people here today. First, we have Bruce Cutright. He is currently the Vice President of Human Resources at Mary Lanning. He has over 35 years of human resource management experience. He's been in multiple industries, but it's really spent most of his career in healthcare. Over the years, mostly at Mary Lanning, he's remodeled their selection process to think about talent. He's created performance development programs, which includes our philosophy around 5 conversations. He's worked within their benefits, their compensation strategies, and their industrial relations. So we're very proud to have him. He has empathy, communication, includer, woo, and individualization. Those are great strengths, Bruce. He's a very kind person, by the way. The other wonderful person on the call is Becky Sullivan. And Becky is their wellness manager for Mary Lanning. She's also a Gallup-Certified strengths coach. And she has led the entire effort around creating an integrated approach for Mary Lanning between well-being, engagement, and strengths. So I know you're going to have lots of questions. She's done it. She's figured out that magic of how do I help my team members at Mary Lanning really focus on their strengths, help them be engaged, and help them live a life where they can thrive. Becky's top strengths are ideation, maximizer, relator, input, and activator. So we've got some great strengths to talk about, both from them individually and for what they've done for their organization. But I'm going to start with Bruce. So Bruce, tell us, how did this partnership with Gallup begin?
Wow. Well, it started back in 2008. Actually, we had an initiative going on with the hospital to remodel the hospital. We were updating the facility, But at the same time, our human resources metrics did not look good. And there was a lot of focus on making the hospital look good, but we weren't investing in those human capital strategies. At least I didn't think as much as we should be. And when we looked at our HR metrics, our first year turnover was 48%. So you think about that, 1 out of every 2 people that we were hiring back in 2007, 2008, 1 out of every 2 were leaving the organization before the end of the year for the time that they hired. And I thought about that and I thought, gee, when you started college, a lot of us, maybe we had that same experience in that you're in orientation as a freshman, and maybe the president or the counselor says 1 out of every 3 of you will be here in your senior year. That's not very engaging. So we knew we had a problem, and we had a 25% turnover rate with RNs, which were very hard to find in Hastings, Nebraska. So that was unacceptable. And a 22% turnover rate overall. Again, unacceptable for our marketplace because the labor pool is so skinny. So I knew we had to do something. On top of the poor financials, we had the poor human resources metrics. And I knew intuitively that if I didn't do something, and that if the rest of the senior team didn't do something, frankly, maybe our jobs were in trouble. I knew about Gallup. I had some experience having been as an undergrad, knew about Donald Clifton. I knew about strengths. I did a lot of reading, and where we're located, we're not very far from Omaha, Nebraska. So I actually made an appointment with a Gallup representative at that time, and that's where our engagement began. But little did I know how much I didn't know at the time. And it's been a wonderful partnership since 2008, and we can elaborate a lot more on that as throughout this hour.
Oh, that's perfect, Bruce. Thank you. So you really started the partnership. You created the path and this journey. And then Becky, you came in and you really wanted to make this journey around becoming a strengths-based organization. Do you want to talk a little bit around how Mary Lanning has become a strengths-based organization?
Denise is giving me a lot of credit, but there's actually a whole team of people here. We have some great strengths coaches, some great well-being coaches that have really worked to push this through. And I guess to start, just when we decided that we really wanted to engage deeper into strengths, it wasn't a great time for us. They say that there's no great time to ask for things. Well, this really was not a great time to ask for something. We actually had a new hospital that was being built down the road from us, which was going to be new competition. We were told kind of across the board to cut expenses in a big way. So it wasn't a really excellent time to ask for more spending. And we had just implemented new EMR software, which anyone who works in healthcare knows what a trying task that is, not only from the expenditure, but also just the training of everyone. And so that was the time we chose to ask to do strengths on a more universal basis. My colleague Renee Foster and I put together some proposals, and we're actually really passionate about making this happen. Went in and talked to our CEO, and fortunately, he approved it. And I guess at that point, we were kind of off and running.
Becky, Mary Lanning began with well-being and engagement first. How did the well-being path help you with the strengths path?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like our well-being program paved the way for our strengths program. We had been, when we first started really thinking about making strengths becoming a strengths-based organization, we had a well-being program in place for about 8 years. And that program, we meet with people one-on-one, we do coaching with them. And we have about 85% participation in our well-being program. So we were hitting the majority of our employees. So it was a pretty natural transition for us to go from well-being coaching to strengths coaching. And as part of our initiative, every single person in our organization knows at least their top 5 strengths. Our leaders all know their top 34, and we actually have departments within the organization who actually the entire department has their full 34. And we do coaching around all of that. So every single person from the CEO on down has been coached, has had a coaching session with strengths. And we use that as kind of our springboard. I guess that well-being is part of our springboard of how we can work with strengths as well.
And if I'm not mistaken, you actually use strengths to help people focus on their well-being, correct?
Yeah.
So if I have high activator, what would you tell me?
I tell you, you're going to be great at starting everything that you're going to do, but the end result, you're going to have to find a different strength to use probably. But that's so true, Denise. I know, and if other people listening in have tried to do coaching in the whole organization and tried to do that, the naming and claiming piece is great on that. We're easily able to help people with the naming and the claiming. It's the aiming that can get to be difficult. And where we've integrated that strengths with our well-being, that gives us opportunities for conversations every year with people on how they are aiming their strengths at their well-being goals. So, how would they take those strengths that they have and use those to achieve goals? And sometimes it's not using a specific strength. Maybe it's turning down another strength because that strength is keeping you from achieving your goals. And so, that's one way we look to really integrate into the organization. When we first started, we also just tried to see what was in existence that we could start using the strengths language with. So our new employee orientation, we talk about strengths with our employees from day one. When leaders do rounding with their employees, we give them some help with questions that they could ask around strengths, that they can and do that. We talk about it at leader meetings. We try to give our leaders tools to be able to take strengths back to their departments. And I should mention here too, we have an excellent team of managers that work here that help significantly with spreading the message. Our staff doesn't have time to reach everyone in the organization, and our leaders are great assets in helping us to spread that strengths message. And just really looking at every place that we could possibly integrate that strengths terminology and well-being terminology into the organization.
That is fabulous. Now, Becky, you went from the individual perspective. Bruce, I'd like you to share the story of how, you have this wonderful strategic idea of creating a very broader strengths-based organization and some of the things that you've done with performance management or, what you've done with your performance development and how you've looked at that and what you've started to create from your lens.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Performance management and most CHROs you would talk to, that's a topic that's of great interest to most people and of great frustration. And it's been a topic that I've been interested in for probably 2 decades and never found what I thought was the right thing. But we knew from Gallup how important strengths-based management was. And we knew from the research that Gallup performed that when people are managed to their strengths, they're more engaged rather than trying to fix weaknesses. So we knew managing people from their strengths made them more engaged, and making people more engaged or facilitating engagement also improved performance. And that translates into higher service to our customers, in this case, patients. So we were very interested in that, but we had matured enough as an organization, and through the work that Becky did and her team we had an advantage because everybody had been coached. Everybody had had their CliftonStrengths finders. They'd had at least one coaching session. Our managers, our vice presidents, our CEO, they all were conversant in the language of strengths-based management. They knew their own strengths, and we had started down the journey of team strengths. So that lent itself very nicely to what we learned again from Gallup about those 5 conversations. And we already knew that employees want frequent two-way communication. They want to know frequently how they're performing. They want to be involved in their own goal setting. They want to know what the company's goals are. And department directors want to have their department goals aligned with the corporate goals and the individual goals aligned with the department goals. All that being said, everything came into alignment. Our employees were coached in strengths. They were conversant in strengths-based language. We had the tools now necessary. So through great collaborative effort, we actually took what we knew, and we also surveyed our directors and asked them what's important, what do you like about our current process, what do you dislike, and we knew we had to develop our own process. So with the involvement of the IT department and the marketing department and the HR department, we developed what we call GPS, which stands for goals, performance, and strengths. And so all of those things were aligned, and we explained the why to each step. So the first step, of course, was goal setting. And before people go and do that, it's more than just a database. We wanted something that wasn't an off-the-shelf performance management process. You know, in the old days, when we trained people how to do performance evaluations, to use that old term, we trained them on finding a quiet place to work, to talk about the positives as much as how much people could improve. But we knew we weren't doing enough. It was about performance development. And in this case, we have the tools necessary then to develop people through their strengths. So first step, goal setting. Next step, a quick connect. Third step, which comes all of this throughout the year, we talk again about reconnecting, team collaboration. All of these involve strengths. And then the fourth step I consider to be the most important. We really get into that strengths, performance development, career development discussion between manager and employee. And that takes some doing. And with each introduction of each step, we provide a video to explain the why we're doing this. And so we actually have in one video, Becky and one of her employees talking about strengths and how we're using strengths in that conversation to improve performance. It was so well received by our employees. We're starting our third year with this process, making improvements as we go, explaining to people using 21st century technology, video teaching, and people having the opportunity to do it on their own pace and learn. And then the fifth step is the look back. But the whole time it's a seamless conversation that we're managing people to their strengths and building that bridge from manager to employee in that strengths-based concept. We're very excited about it, and it has been met with a lot of excitement, I think, by our employees. They enjoy it so much better to have that two-way communication, and it's more transformational than transactional. We want the conversations to transform people. Becky doesn't give herself enough credit, I don't think. I've always said that the well-being initiative at Mary Lanning was the secret sauce to our engagement. People know that the organization cares about them, not just as integral parts of all the gears, but we care about them as individuals. And when you add strengths on top of that, on top of the well-being, it all fits together. The results have been remarkable.
Bruce, I am just going to have you comment, and then we'll get Becky's input on kind of what she's seen from the GPS. But you did something quite bold. You removed ratings, correct? From people's performance reviews. So just give us a little bit of why you did that. What does it look like? And if I'm a manager, how do I rate my team? And how does that fit with a strengths-based philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Denise, and I'm glad you asked it. And to be honest, there are people, rating systems are so ingrained in most performance management processes. And anybody listening to this will know that and are probably shaking their heads up and down. Yes, we know that. And yet, as an individual, it doesn't feel good to be the recipient of a rating system. And when we hire people, and think about it, You hire people to succeed. You hire them for their innate talent, and you want them to succeed. Nobody starts a position with the intent to fail, and nobody starts a position with the intent to goof off, to be lazy. Everybody starts the position to succeed. And so this performance development process is designed to do just that. The look back, the rating systems are focused on the look back only. How did you do? And there's some merit to understanding how a person performs if you have pay for performance, for example. But we want our focus to be on development. And that constant feedback, and by the advantage of having 5 steps or 5 conversations that are totally dedicated to performance gives the employee frequent feedback. They know how they stand. They don't walk into the last conversation not knowing how they stand. So a rating system really becomes unimportant. It's not important at all. And we want to continue to keep that focus on development.
Now, Becky, you were really the person on the street, right? So I'm the manager and I've got my team and I don't have ratings. What were some of the questions that the managers were giving you and saying, how do I do this? What were some of the most common questions or the things that you really had to coach manager through?
Well, I think actually just that if I'm not rating people, how am I measuring? If I can't measure something, then how am I able to evaluate? And, I think some of that just worked its way back through our well-being process. You can set a goal of wanting to lose weight, which would be measurable, but how are you going to lose weight? And then how do I hold you accountable for that? So I'm going to lose weight because I'm going to, limit my calorie intake to X amount, or I'm going to exercise so many days a week. Well, we just tried to help leaders see that they could still do that within their department. So, if the goal is to have better relations within the department, I'm going to talk to or find out something new about 3 people every month, or, just kind of things that they could use as ways to be able to measure, but maybe on a little different thought process than they had before. And I think one thing that's worked really well too is we've tried to, again, integrate the things that we're doing. So when people set their goals within their department on the GPS, some of those sometimes carry over into what they're planning to do for well-being. So a lot of the department leaders will on the GPS system have their employees set one personal goal. So maybe that personal goal might be the same thing that they're going to do for their well-being goal. Or if their purpose or career goal that they're setting in their department, maybe that's something that they also want to use for their well-being goal. So instead of just having that one touch, you actually are getting 2 touches then with the same goal, and things are all together. You're not having to set a goal for this thing and a goal for this thing and a goal for this thing. They all kind of interweave together.
Not to put you on the spot, Becky, but when you think about what has been the best outcome from using this integrated model of engagement, well-being, and strengths, what are you seeing the associates saying about it? I know you've done quite a few follow-up surveys and gained their input, but what are you hearing from the associates about all of this process?
Well, I think they feel cared for. Because all of these goals are about them and assessing what are they good at and what do they want, how do they want to be developed, what do they want for themselves, how can we help them be thriving individuals. It all it centers around them as human beings more so than an asset within the organization. And so I think it just personalizes. It's a very personal approach. We're not all of the same. We can't just set like a universal goal for a department and expect every single person is going to excel at that. People need different levels of things, and they need things that speak to their strengths.
That is fabulous. So, Bruce, you quoted a pretty high turnover score in 2008. I believe that was the year where you first started tracking your turnover with you. You've had some different impact over the years. Tell us about how all of these programs, from engagement to well-being to now becoming a strengths-based organization, has impacted Mary Lanning's performance.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And this is so much fun to talk about, particularly when when talking to other organizations. When we talk about strengths and engagement, for some people, they maybe don't realize the impact that truly does have on the bottom line of an organization. But what we were able to find, we reduced our first year turnover rate from 48%, as I mentioned earlier, to the end of 2020 down to 12%. So think about how much that impacts the cost. There's a true cost to turnover. And that's over $1 million in savings in the cost of turnover, from 48% to 12% at the end of 2020 in just first year turnover. Our overall turnover reduced from 22% down to 12%. And I want to note, going back to first year turnover, 2 years ago, our first year turnover rate was only 8%. And when we provided that information to some other entities, they thought we did our calculations incorrectly, because it's almost unheard of to have an 8% turnover rate. We had a 0% first year RN turnover rate 2 years ago. So think about that. In a labor pool that is so skinny, where there's one candidate for every 10 vacancies in the state of Nebraska for RNs, we lost none that we hired in that first year. So is there a financial impact to using strengths-based management, hiring for talent, listening to people's opinions, making their opinions count, and having an engaged workforce? The answer shortly is yes, there definitely is. So in that, the impact has been remarkable with that. And our engagement ratio went from 2.5 the first year that we measured it, and then you mentioned it in the introductory remarks, to 16.3 to 1 engaged to actively disengaged. And I credit the work that Becky and her group has done on strengths, everybody being conversant in the strengths language as we talk about that, along with our managers really being invested in this whole concept. It's important now. It's a competency for managers at Mary Lanning to understand and to know what strengths-based management is. It's important when we hire managers, they have to know and they have to buy into that. That is a competency now at Mary Lanning.
One of the things I really appreciate about the leadership team at Mary Lanning is that they never rest on their laurels. They're always thinking about what's our next step, what's the next journey, what's the next mountain we might climb. So for either one of you, when you think about what is the next journey for Mary Lanning, where do you see the next emphasis or the next skill development that you think needs to be put in place, either for leadership, managers, or individual contributors?
Well, I'll jump in first. Yeah, I'll jump in first. That I think it's important, and we've started this initiative somewhat, and not in a formal way. We hope very soon. Our managers have to transition from boss to coach, and I think we have started that initiative. People understand, again, a competency is to become a coach rather than being a boss. So in the performance management process, performance development process that we just talked about, that will be one of the next important initiatives, is that those managers have yet another level of understanding of strengths as taught by Becky and her team, and how to be conversant in that dialogue and that two-way communication every step of the way in the GPS. And so I see that as the next step. It's hard to sustain sometimes. It was in some ways easier to go from very low to very high engagement, but sustaining that engagement in times of a pandemic and all of the other challenges that healthcare organizations have, sometimes that can be hard. And it requires continuous focus. We cannot take our eye off the ball. We have to focus on those tools that got us there in the first place and not forget about that. So Becky, I jumped in. You probably have better ideas than I do on what those next steps are.
Well, I think, Bruce, you said it perfectly. COVID obviously derailed a lot of plans for a lot of people all over the world. We were fortunate in that our engagement scores did stay pretty steady, which of course I think contribute to the culture that we had built. Common language, again, we had people who were gone. We had people who were here all the time. We kind of had a wide range of things that were happening with our employees. Because we had that common language, we could still message, we could still do things around well-being and around strengths that didn't necessarily need explaining, that people could just look at or access and be able to do on their own. But because of everything that happened last year, we weren't able to target messages probably as much as what we would like. We weren't able to maybe do some of the things that we had hoped to do with leaders, with individual contributors. So this year definitely is to work more with managers with strengths. I'm thrilled. We actually we're in our kind of action planning stages for our engagement survey. So I'm getting tons of emails from our leaders who want to do strengths-based things with their employees as part of their action plans for this year to help increase their engagement scores. So that's already coming through on their own, and we haven't actually even ourselves offered the things that we'd like to do this year, which is doing more of that aiming with leaders. We need to sit them down again, have more coaching with them for themselves personally, their own personal development, but also how that looks when they go back into their departments, and just providing. I know our strengths team is working on a menu of things that we can give to leaders. So either things that we can come to their departments and do, or that they can just do on their own. So we're going to provide them with some tools to be able to continue that either with or without us, but definitely focusing more on that aiming. How do we continue to aim our strengths?
That's excellent. Jim, I'm hoping that we have some great questions from the group. Do you want to come in and help us hear some of those great questions?
Yeah, we've got quite a few that are out there. Bruce, I think we'll throw this one over to you. So you're saying that you simply measure people on whether they achieve their goals or not. It's a simple yes or no rather than rating scores specific to highly personalized goals. So is the goal setting process a yes or no, or is it? And if it's not, how are you measuring that on the back end as far as people achieving those?
Well, it really isn't a simple yes or no. And if we think about it in practical terms, many goals don't have a 12-month lifespan to them. They may have a 2 or 3 or 4-year lifespan to them, or they may just be 3 months. But so when we measure the goals, the conversation is not more than just yes or no. It's, did you accomplish the goal, or is it still in progress? And if it's still in progress, what were some of those barriers? What is it that we have to do? What can I do as your manager to remove those barriers, et cetera? And what are your plans to do that? And if you didn't accomplish the goal, let's explain why. We all know, and we've been in situations where you establish a goal at the beginning of the year, and then life happens. Things change. The black swan event happens, i.e. the pandemic. Everything changes. So the important part of this whole conversation is about the two-way dialogue and having an understanding about that. We hire people as professionals. They should be treated as professionals. And we want that to always happen. It's not simple yes or no, but how are we doing and what progress are you making towards that goal? I hope that helped the person that asked the question.
I think so. Becky, you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add too. I want to just point out too, we still have, there's required competencies that people have to do. There's a separate disciplinary action type of thing that people still have to do. But this is the meat. I mean, you have very few people who need the disciplinary action or who don't complete their competencies. This is for the majority of the people, not the minority of the people.
And Becky, just highlight also, because you are a healthcare system, you also have regulations and standards and protocols minimums, right? So when you think about your patient quality scores, your physician interactions, those types of things, those are all part of the conversations, correct?
Exactly. So, right, we have certain things that are required. And the cool thing about the way we have it set up with the 5 critical conversations is you are touching base with your manager consistently throughout the year. So if there's something that needs to be addressed with an employee, that can happen during one of those conversations as well.
Becky, before I get to Kevin's question in the chat room, I want to ask you, as a certified coach on the ground doing the work, oftentimes not everybody's super excited about, like, we talk about these things, they're like a slam dunk, like, oh yeah, everybody's going to be super excited. How are you handling, this is a common question I get in the coaching community all the time. How are you handling the folks that are kind of, I don't want to say skeptical, but they're a little standoffish? How do you guys kind of work with individuals like that?
Well, I think first off, they're required to do the coaching visit. So, but to your point, Jim, I mean, I can't tell you the number of people I've had come sit down in my office and it's like, oh gosh, my manager told me I have to do this thing. And honestly, usually by the end of the conversation, they have flipped. Again, you always have your handful of people who just really think it's a bunch of hooey, but for the most part, once people understand it and understand that it's about them and their personal development, it's a lot easier to kind of change that. So we have a few, but for the most part, people are pretty well bought in.
I think, Denise, would you add anything to that? You're on the ground all the time.
I try and be on the ground with these guys. They're fantastic to work with. I don't want to take credit for this. Bruce brought this in. Mary Lanning selects managers using the Gallup selection tool. So they're looking for people who have the talent and want to lead people, right? And so there's always a few of those who aren't thrilled about it, but they're already helping themselves as an organization by selecting the right type of manager who wants to lead people and care about people.
Bruce, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I am so glad you brought that up because it is important. I think a lot of the listeners may be so familiar with the language of, in some organizations, it's all about getting rid of the low performers and dealing with people that aren't performing at the level where they're supposed to be. There's a lot of time and effort and books written about that, but they're missing the point. The most important thing that any employer can do is to hire the right person to begin with. And if you put it in terms, if you owned your own business, you want to hire somebody that you know can perform that job innately. And when somebody has the innate talent to perform a job, they enjoy it a lot more. They don't fatigue as quickly. They have lower absenteeism, and they just enjoy themselves so much better in the job. So we put a lot of effort into that. And our latest Q12 scores spoke to that. We found out that the people that we hired that are recommended are 76% engaged. Think about that. Those that were just conditional were 60% engaged, and those that were not recommended. And in full disclosure, not everybody we hire passes shouldn't use the word pass, but they don't display the innate talent to perform the position. Those folks are only 56% engaged. But it kind of makes sense. If you've known and you think of people who are very successful in their own fields, they never fatigue. They keep working. They love what they do. They live what they do. And they sometimes do it into their elderly age. I'm thinking of musicians. I'm thinking of politicians. I'm thinking of people that we all know that are very famous because they have the innate talent to perform their job. And that should be at every level in an organization. That has really been one of the strongest levers we've pulled, along with after we get people in there. If I can, and I don't want to be guilty of talking too much, and I know that I can, but I think that if we think of it in terms of going on a hike, and if a big storm comes up in the middle of the hike and you have to find shelter, engagement really does live and breathe at the work group level. So if you have a bad manager, somebody who's not innately talented to manage that group and you're stuck in that shelter with that bad manager, your experience will be very poor. Again, maybe you have a good manager, but you have other coworkers or other hikers in this case that you're hunkered up with in the shelter that you don't get along with, or they don't display the innate talent to do their jobs. Your experience will again be very miserable. And if you didn't yourself have the innate talent to go on the hike in the first place and you're stuck in the shelter, you would have been miserable before the storm even came up, and you're even more miserable inside the shelter. But if you have the best of all combinations, the good manager who is innately talented to manage others, your coworkers or your co-hikers are innately talented to do the hike, and you have a manager that manages people to their strengths, you're going to get out of that shelter more quickly and with greater ease. And so it's maybe a dumb analogy, but I like to think of it in those terms, because when we go to work, we don't think about who the CEO is. We don't think about who the vice presidents are. We think about our coworkers, and we think about our immediate supervisor. And if they all have the innate talent and they're all managing to their strengths, life is so much easier and more fun.
Denise, there's a question in the chat room. We don't want to turn this into a sales pitch about our selection tool, but can you, if folks were interested in partnering with us, that is a tool that you need to partner with us on. Can you just, what's the best way for them to get in touch with us on that?
If you already have a colleague, a Gallup colleague that you're working with, just reach out to them. They'll bring in the right person to talk about our science. I think it's always important for you to understand what our science is behind our selection process, what roles is it best to use it for. We can use it from the very top of the house with CEOs all the way down to the front line. We have a sweeter spot with what we call our in-depth interviews right now. So that would be the first place. If you don't have a Gallup person that you've already spoken to, within our Gallup website, you can just reach out to kind of our hotline. You can certainly do that. Or I don't know if my contact information is in here, Jim. I'm happy to take that and just refer it to the right people also.
Yeah.
So can make that happen.
Denise, I'll tell them the easiest way is just send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we'll make sure we get that routed to the right person that way. Okay. Becky, anything you want to weigh in on that before I go to the next question? Anything else you want to say?
No, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. So Kevin asked this question around well-being, and Becky, I'll throw this one to you first. So during this very high stress time in the healthcare industry, due to the pandemic, what have you done in the areas of well-being to promote support, self-care, boundaries, et cetera? Kind of how you alluded to it, I think, a little bit during the time, but can you give us maybe some practical steps of what you guys are doing around well-being?
Well, on an organizational level, I guess, we've kind of spent the last year just accumulating a lot of resources that people can access. We have an internal internet kind of tool that people can click on. So we've put a ton of things in there, from meditation and mindfulness to the registered dietitian that works on our staff put together how to easy meals to make at home, because all of a sudden we were cooking and nobody knew how to cook, food prep, that kind of thing. And so, we just kind of tried to put together some things that we thought universally would be helpful. We also, even though we couldn't do them necessarily in person all the time, depending on the directed health measures that were in place in our area, but we were still doing our wellbeing coaching visits with people, even if it was by the phone or it was via Zoom. So we were able to kind of individually help people with those things too, and direct them to resources. And again, just because we've had this program in place for so long and people do see us as a resource, usually if people are really struggling, they do reach out to us so that we can get them to the right place. And I just do want to mention, we have a great employee assistance program also that we made sure people had all of the information for. So if they needed counseling during that time, that they were able to access that as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. We've learned a ton about well-being through this time. We wrote a book 10 years ago on it. We have a brand new book coming out here in early April that's really designed for corporate well-being. I'm sure you guys, that's kind of be in your sweet spot, right? It's kind of the part 2 of this and how we do this in organizations. Bruce, would you add anything from your role when we think about well-being? Would you add anything to that conversation?
Just that having a well-being initiative like we do, having Becky and her team has provided a lot more resilience than perhaps some organizations that don't have that have. We have been more resilient. Not to say that we don't have some post-traumatic stress from the pandemic. We have people that were at the bedside of patients with COVID severe cases, and literally watching people die every week. That's very hard. And it's life drama every single day. And these folks can't get enough praise for what they do. I admire every single one of them. And it's the well-being program so important to focusing on that. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't provide immunity from the kind of trauma that you might see, the kind of sad stories that exist out there, but it certainly does help. And that focus on well-being is so important, I think, in a hospital setting, in any organization, but particularly now, and was during the 2020.
Denise, in your role and what you do for Gallup as a kind of senior expert, anything you're seeing or advice you'd give to folks that are both listening and
Yep. So I do want to, so the book that Jim just spoke about, our new well-being book, is actually written for the manager. So it has, what can I do as a manager to help my team with their well-being? There's certain conversations that are easier to have with a manager than others within our well-being framework. When you think about finances, right, which is financial health is one of our spokes on our well-being wheel. That's a harder conversation. But as a manager, I can certainly share all of our financial support systems that we have from the organization. We might have a financial advisor. So that's number one that you might want to think about. Number two, our Gallup website. If you are a current Gallup client, on your Gallup Access, we have so many articles, pieces of advice around well-being and what you can do as a manager to support well-being. Make sure you're looking at that. And then the third, I want to just give you a few quick tips about our COVID research that we launched in, it was about March through September. So we worked with 400 organizations. It's actually a little bit less than 400, but that we measured around COVID, right? How was the leadership responding to COVID? What were their managers doing? Was there a plan? Our number one item that helped with a person feeling cared about and having stronger well-being was if their manager kept them informed and helped them be flexible in their work environment. You just think about those two things. And with what Bruce said around keeping the dialogue open, hearing what people are struggling with, a simple conversation is, how are you doing this week? What's causing you a barrier to your work? How are you doing at home with juggling all the new responsibilities that you have? There's some easy questions that you could ask of a team member that really shows that you care and that you're a representative of the organization and you're going to work for that employee to make it work for them. So those would just be three little tidbits I'd give you.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for that, Denise. Okay, final question for the two of you. Becky, I'll start with you. By the way, I was in a phone conversation with a buddy the other day and he said, "Hey, I haven't asked you this in a while. How are you?" It was just like a simple, "How's it going?" And I knew it wasn't just a hi, how are you? I knew it was, I care about you, right? And I think even as a manager, I think it's important that other managers are checking in with the management and their team to ask the managers how they're doing. They're just getting crushed these days. So we have to be aware of that. Becky, let me start with you. As you think about 2021, what are you most hopeful for as we get through this year, as you look out ahead and you kind of see what's there? What are you most hopeful for?
Wow. I guess personally, there would be a lot of things I would be helpful for.
That's fine. Yeah,
organizationally, I'm just I'm excited that hopefully we can return to some fragment of normalcy at some point, be able to gather in groups again. I know people really miss being with each other, seeing each other, being in person. And I think just again, for us, that strengths conversation, that well-being conversation, that integration of that. I just want to add to what Denise said too, with some Gallup resources. I know some of those tools, I know one that I used with our leaders there was one with how different strengths react to stress. And so that was great because, I actually had been thinking, oh, adaptability people, they're so lucky, they can just go with it. When in reality, they may be ones that are really suffering because they're trying to adapt to everybody's needs, and they might be completely exhausted from all of the adapting that they're trying to do. And so just some tools like that, back to that strengths-based conversation, how are we using strengths even to check on people? How are your strengths doing? Are your strengths okay? And just, being able to, I hope to continue that here at Mary Lanning. We've got some great things going, but we have a lot more that we can do.
Oh, that's great. Bruce, in the minute or two we have left, what are you most hopeful for as we think about 2021?
And I hope I can make this brief, but when you asked that question, I actually thought, and people have to bear with me here when I think of this, I've known 3 concentration camp survivors in my lifetime. And what we went through in the pandemic is not anything near what the survivors of a concentration camp went through. But those 3 survivors of the concentration camp all said one thing in common. And that was when they got out, when the Allies came and they were freed from the concentration camp. One lady that I knew and thought so much of said the soldiers felt sorry for them. They were trying to offer them gifts, gold, jewelry, things that the Nazis had confiscated, and trying to give it back to them. But the survivors didn't want any of that. They were just so happy for their freedom. And what happened was it was a realization that they were still alive, and that they could still communicate with each other, and that they had a life to look forward to. The pandemic had, I think, an effect of normalizing things in terms of bringing us back to what is important in life. And I think that what we're seeing now are some of the residual effects, maybe some post-traumatic stress. In a way, what I'm hopeful for is that we start to refocus again on those things that are most important, that does make a workplace really what makes it a good workplace. And I feel so fortunate to work with the people that I do, the Beckys of the world, the CEO that I work with, my coworkers. We're more resilient because we have what we have. But I think 2021 gives us opportunity to really have laser focus on those things that make work a good place to work.
That's a good, Bruce. That's a great way to say it. Denise, any final thoughts from you? And let's thank our guests for coming on.
Would love that. Last final thought, appreciation, acknowledgement, and recognition are one of the biggest levers for resilience. And thinking through just how do we give that to each other, and encouraging each other to give that, I think, is one of the best things that we can do right now. And to acknowledge that we've made progress, we've survived, and we're conquering, right? So I think one of Don's favorite quotes was, we're never as strong as when we have our strengths in mind. And Don Clifton is who I'm speaking to. And so how do we live that every day? And how do we help others see their strengths in action? That's what I would ask of all of the people on the call today. And then Becky and Bruce, your leadership, your enthusiasm, your patience, to keep this alive and driving. It hasn't been a journey overnight. It's been small steps that had led you to a huge goal. You've really conquered a nice mountain. And I'm looking forward to the next journey with you. I appreciate being a partner of you, and Gallup appreciates your partnership. So thank you so much. Jim, thank you for allowing us to share the story.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure. Thanks to you too, as well. And it's always fun. Like, I have the best job in the world because I get to hear all these stories in real time. Not only that, I get to see and meet you guys behind the scenes as we set up, and we get to have the conversation. So thanks for doing that. I'm going to ask you guys to hang tight for a second. Don't go anywhere. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available now in Gallup Access. And Denise mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, that sign in there will take you right to your strengths dashboard. Kind of a convenient way to get into those. Maybe it's been a while since you've seen them. Go back and revisit them. So gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. If you need coaching, master coaching, or you want to become a Gallup-Certified strengths coach, like Becky is there, we can do that for you as well. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. If you're in an organization and you've got some questions around this, you can send that email in as well. Same place, coaching@gallup.com. We'll get right back to you. if you first time you've watched this and you want to see more like it, just follow us on Eventbrite, gallup.eventbrite.com. Don't forget, we have a summit coming up, virtual summit today. Satya Nadella from Microsoft is going to be our keynote. It's going to be super great. You're not going to want to miss it. Gallup@work.com. You can get all the details there, June 8th and 9th, to make that available for you. Join us on any social platform. Just search Clifton Strengths. And we want to thank you for joining us today. If you're in the chat room and you're live with us, a special thanks. It's always fun to hang out with you guys. We'll see you next week here on Call to Coach. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.